Hi, I'm Krista Buford, and I am going to be talking about operant behavior, which is chapter 4 in the book About Behaviorism by B.F. Skinner. Looks like this. So to get started, before starting completely, I thought it was important to review the difference between operant behavior and respondent behavior, because as I was reading the chapter, I found myself going, all right, so what's the difference and how can I keep them straight? So operant behavior is caused by the consequences. So whatever happens after the behavior, and a respondent behavior is responding to a stimulus. It's the result of whatever happens before it. That kind of breaks it down as to what the difference is and maybe will help you to keep them straight. So respondent is responding, and an operant is because of whatever happens after. Key terms that were in this chapter that may or may not be discussed throughout this presentation that I thought were important are as follows. Frustrated expectations, a condition produced by the termination of an accustomed reinforcement. So it leads to the termination of the behavior. Abulia is the lack of willpower. That's just kind of a cool word. It doesn't really have an effect of anything for this presentation. Variable ratio schedules I will talk about later on in this presentation, and they're simply the reinforcement that occurs after a given average number of responses, but in which the next response to be reinforced cannot be predicted. And I think that's the most important, is because it's variable and it's a schedule, but nobody really knows that schedule. Well, I'm sure somebody out there does, but the person participating in the variable ratio schedule does not. So as we'll talk about later, this is the type of reinforcement that is used for gambling. An aversive stimuli is stimuli which function as reinforcers when they are reduced or terminated. Raising consciousness is increasing the probability a person will respond in a certain way. Okay, I'll give you a second to look over those if you need another second. I can't see you guys, so I don't know when you'll be done. So, all right, moving on. Reinforcers. Reinforcers. If a behavior is reinforced, it is more likely to occur again. Sounds kind of common sense, but just in case. So if a behavior is reinforced, most likely it will occur again. Simply like my dog, if I tell her to sit and I give her a treat, then the next time I tell her to sit, she knows she'll receive a treat, so she'll be more likely to participate in that behavior. So there are two types of reinforcement. There's positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. A positive reinforcement strengthens any behavior that produces it. The example given in the book is that when you are thirsty, you drink a glass of water. The consequence of the action is thirst being quenched. This consequence encourages the person to participate in the same behavior the next time he is thirsty. Negative reinforcement strengthens any behavior that reduces or terminates it. An example given in the book is if your shoe is pinching your foot, then you take it off. And when you take the shoe off, it stops pinching your foot. The next time you wear the shoes and it's pinching, you will be more likely to take it off to relieve yourself or to remove the negative stimulus. How do you know you love him? I don't know if anybody else out there is Disney fans or knows that song. I'm not going to sing it for you. But anyway, how do you know you love him? How do we know? It's a feeling. So in behaviorism, they're very much focused on we can't know what's going on inside of another person. We can't decide how a person will act based on feelings. So how do you know you love them? Operant conditioning is simply a product of natural selection. Natural selection leads to the survival of a species. Operant behaviors help a species to survive. To love someone, or to show that you love them, you do the things that he or she likes. So love may have feelings that accompany it, but to love is to behave in ways having certain kinds of effects. On page 52 in the book, it states that feelings are merely collateral products of the conditions responsible for the behavior. So you're in a loving relationship, and to show that person that you love them, you do what they like. So if they like going to see rom-coms, you go watch rom-coms. If they like to go out to eat at fancy dinners, you go out to eat at fancy dinners. So you know that you love them by the behaviors you display. Going back to the previous point, operant conditioning is simply the product of natural selection. So these are the behaviors that our species have participated in to increase the likelihood of survival. Without operant behaviors, we wouldn't have survival. Predicting behavior. One vital factor in predicting how a person will respond is to know the level of deprivation he is experiencing. The level of deprivation will then play a role in how reinforcing an event will be. If the individual is extremely deprived, he is more likely to engage in irrelevant behavior. For example, if an individual is extremely hungry, he is more likely to scarf his food down the moment he sees it. If he has recently eaten, he is less likely to inhale his food if he chose to eat at all. Survival also plays a role in how reinforcing an event will be. So as humans, we have learned how to participate in certain behaviors to survive. Operant responses, are they magic? So operant responses, they don't need to be conditioned, like in respondent behaviors. So respondent behaviors need to be conditioned. It's pairing a response to a stimulus. However, in operant behaviors, the responses don't need any kind of antecedent or stimulus to happen. An operant response just appears. But it's not magic. So the fact that a cause is not necessary has led many to fill in the blank with inventing an initiating event. So it doesn't make sense to us in the here and now, so we make up an antecedent for the behavior. Just because an operant response does not need an antecedent doesn't mean that it's magic or it doesn't have a cause. The cause is just harder to spot. We can predict the probability a person will engage in a particular behavior based on that person's history. Contingencies. So we've all heard phrases that are like, yeah, it's contingent upon this, or I will go, but it's contingent upon if somebody else goes. The motivating factors for operant behaviors are the contingencies. Behaviorism can't deal with the purposes or intentions, and things that happen inside of people, like motives and purposes, they're hard to measure and they're impossible to see. Some consequences are not reinforcing. Whether or not a consequence is reinforcing depends on the contingencies. Contingencies are found in the environment. They are ever-changing, and they affect the probability of a person responding in a given way. Behavior should not be contributed to feelings. They should be contributed to the contingencies. Confidence versus extinction. So as stated previously, operant behavior is dependent on contingencies. Confidence comes from a specific act almost always being reinforced. For example, a person continually makes a free throw in basketball. He is more confident he will make the next shot if he has made multiple shots previously. But the flip side, the lack of reinforcement leads to the extinction of a behavior. For example, that same man continually attempts free throws, and time after time he misses. Eventually, he decides he's no good at basketball and stops trying. What causes certain feelings? Remember when I said behaviorism cannot deal with intentions or purpose? Though that is true, behaviorism can shed light on why we feel homesick, forlorn, lovelorn, or lonely. All of these feelings come from from being unable to emit behaviors we would emit in these situations. Feelings or emotions or behaviors that we would do when we're at home, we don't have a place to do those anymore, so we need a place to emit those behaviors. When we're at home or with other people, toward a romantic partner, with our friends, when one cannot act in the way he would in those situations, it causes these feelings to become awakened. Kind of makes sense. Clear as mud, right? Yeah, so these feelings are felt because the behaviors cannot be emitted. Let that sink in? Kind of a little confusing. All right, variable ratio schedules. As I mentioned, we're going to come back to this. This is the kind of reinforcement that occurs after a given average number of responses, but in which the next response to be reinforced cannot be predicted. Popular example is gambling. Intermittent reinforcement sustains behavior over time. Though the gambler does not know which pull of the lever will win, he will continue to pull the lever until he does win, thus reinforcing the behavior. A negative reinforcer generates a behavior. A punishment is meant to remove a behavior from a person's repertoire. If punishments are removed or are minimized and reinforcing a behavior is emphasized, a person becomes courageous. Terminating depression. Wouldn't that be an awesome thing to be able to do? America, which the book focuses on, it's all about feelings, but behaviorism is finding why, the why things happen. By evoking a behavior such as depression without punishing it, the possibility is then created that the conditioned aversive stimuli, which has caused that behavior, can, over time, undergo extinction. The early years. The early years were referred to as structuralism, and during this time, behaviors were regarded as nothing more than muscle twitches. The belief was that what has happened before will happen again with no concern to stimuli or contingencies. And phenomenology and existentialism, support structuralism. Body systems involved, just a little extra science for you. Respondent conditioning affects the autonomic nervous system, and operant conditioning affects the skeletal musculature. I did practice those words before this. Sorry. Give you a second to read them since I butchered them. All right, the mind's involvement. The mind is not left out of Skinner's interpretation of operant behavior. He states that the mind actually plays an active role in a person's behavior. The past also plays an active role in a person's behavior. The frequency of reinforcement in similar situations a person has been involved in increases or decreases the probability of a behavior. The association of ideas is required in operant behavior because of this. Open-ended questions. All right, I'm finally to the end. So I have 4 questions for you. 1, is there overlap between operant and respondent behaviors? 2, will what has happened previously always happen again? 3, if contingencies of both survival and reinforcement play a hand in behavior, which contingency do you think is more important, survival or reinforcement? And number 4, does the lack of reinforcement always lead to termination, or can some behaviors persist without reinforcement? I hope you enjoyed my presentation. This was all about Chapter 4 and About Behaviorism by B.F. Skinner. If you haven't read it, you should. All right, thanks. Bye.